is a pleasure to see some faces. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We are going to just jump right in, and if anybody else joins, they can meet us where we're at. So I'm going to ask you just to very quickly in the chat box, just introduce who you are, where you work, what you do there, and maybe where you're joining us from. I'm assuming most of us are in our homes somewhere in the great state of Michigan. Welcome, Heather. Jacqueline, it's nice to see you. Hi, Gwen, good to see you, or hear you, or not really see you, but kind of see you. Sam from Owen Intermediate, welcome. Elena from Westland, 6th grade teacher, a coach from Westland. Nice, nice, nice. Just across the bridge, I don't live in, where, in Trenton, Heather? I'm in Pinckney, so I'm not sure we're across the bridge from each other anywhere.
I was getting you mixed up with your buddy that you teach with at RISA. I'll come up with her name in a minute. Okay. I was getting you confused with somebody that lives on Groseal.
Oh, okay.
I can't think, somebody who works at RISA, and I can't think of her name.
Okay. Well,
it'll come to me though.
It'll come to you. Yeah.
I used to work with you at when you came to Malvindale Public School.
Yes, I remember. You know, oh gosh, Cheryl Yoakum used to live on Groseal, I think. Can't remember.
Yeah,
anyway,
I'll get it.
All right, well, welcome. This evening, we're going to be talking about self-and-peer assessing and how to engage students in some self-and-peer assessing. And we're going to do that by having a little bit of direct instruction, and then we're going to be watching some videos and getting you into some breakout rooms to have some conversation around those videos and what you're seeing in terms of what the students are doing in terms of how they're self-assessing themselves, but mostly in terms of what the teachers are doing in terms of setting up the conditions for the students to engage in that self and peer assessment. So these are our norms for this evening. We're going to ask that you are present and participate. When you get into your breakout rooms, we hope that you will turn on your cameras and really get to, interact with one another, but also respect the airtime and give everybody a chance to talk, have a positive mindset. Not everything that we're going to be seeing tonight is taking place in a virtual setting. I do have a couple of videos of some teachers working in the virtual setting and using self-assessment, but most of them are face-to-face still, but there are aspects of it that I definitely know that you can take and put into that remote learning. So we want to have an open mind, and we want to be present, have that positive mindset, and most importantly, make connections to your own practice and what you are doing. So I am Ellen Vorenkamp. I am an assessment consultant at Wayne RISA. I have been at Wayne RISA now for about 13 years. Prior to that, I was a curriculum director for a charter school management company. Prior to that, I was self-employed and still am in terms of a private consulting, and worked at Eastern while I was getting my doctorate. Prior to that, I was a middle school language arts and social studies teacher in Detroit. And prior to that, I was an assistant principal during that time as well. And then I was also a middle school social studies and language arts teacher in El Paso, Texas, back in the day. Been in education long enough. If COVID doesn't make you want to retire, I don't know what does, but I'm getting there. So it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. So I want to play just a quick game here and just kind of get to know you guys just a little bit better. So we're going to do an activity that's called Just Like Me. And what I'm going to invite you to do is make your screen as big as you can to see as many people as you can in terms of your screens. I think there's about, what, 14 or 15 of us online. And I want you to find your little reaction buttons. And when you have your reaction buttons, what we're going to do is I'm going to read a couple of statements. And if these statements apply to you, I want you to give me a thumbs up in your reaction box, okay? So if you hit on them, where are the reactions? Where are the reactions? I don't see my reactions. Are they under the?
They should be at the bottom, and you may have to click the more button.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm not seeing my reactions, but as long as you guys have them. And if you don't have your reactions, you can just do a thumbs up on the screen. So here we go. Is anybody on with us tonight that was not born in the state of Michigan? Gwen was not born in the state of Michigan. Elena was not born in the state of Michigan.
I am. I'm trying to figure out how to get rid of the reaction if I accidentally put it.
Oh, okay. Elena was born in the state of Michigan. Gwen, where were you born?
I was born in Ohio.
Ah, Ohio. Okay, well, I was born in Arizona, so you and I have something in common. We weren't.
Yay, of course.
Yay. Oh, Celeste, you weren't born in Michigan either?
No,
No, where were you born?
Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Minnesota. Nice. Okay. How many of you, have any of you visited all 50 states? No, no, just me? Nobody's like me? Ah, okay. Well, my husband and I went to Hawaii for our honeymoon, which was really our 27th wedding anniversary, but it was our honeymoon, and that was my 50th state. So, all right. How many of you have ever sung karaoke well? Elena has sung karaoke well. Anybody else? Okay, how many of you sung karaoke not so well? Oh, there we go. Heather, Thomas, Laura, Jacqueline, good. Okay, how many of you have sung it actually sober? Just a couple, huh? Samantha, okay. All right. How many of you have more than 4 siblings? More than 4 siblings, so there's 5 of you in your family. No? I've got some small families this time around. Did this a couple days ago and somebody had like 8 brothers and sisters. I was like, wow. All right, how many of you have never in your entire life seen an episode of American Idol? Thomas wins. Nice job, Thomas. You must have a life, something better to do. All right. So that's just a little bit of who we are and what we do. We could go on and on, but we don't have a whole lot of time. So I want to move on and just talk to you a little bit about self and peer assessment and how it fits into the whole world of assessment. And what I thought we would do is start with just some definitions, because everybody's got all these terms that we throw around, something like formative assessment, and everybody thinks they know what it means, but then when you start talking, it's like, no, that's not what it means, you know. So I think it's always good to make sure that we have some clarity in terms of our terminology. So if you look at the word assessment, assessment means to actually gauge, estimate the nature, ability, or quality of something. And when you look at the actual word assessment, it comes from the medieval Latin word of adsidere, which means to sit beside. So literally, when we are assessing students, we are sitting beside them, looking at the evidence of where they're at and where they need to go, and hopefully having and engaging in some conversation and some feedback to really help the kids figure out what they're doing well and what they need to do better the next time, and what might be their first step that they need to take in order to move themselves along. Rick Stiggins gives us a wonderful definition. And if any of you know me, you know that I'm a huge Rick Stiggins fan. He says, assessment is the process of gathering evidence of student learning to inform educational decisions. So when you look at that term, and when you look at that definition that Rick Stiggins offers, it really opens up our thinking around assessment and what we're doing in our classrooms in terms of that word assessment. Rick Stiggins says that we probably spend over 2/3 of our time in our classroom doing assessment-related activities. And what I'm going to do next is show you a graphic that I have started to use in my work around assessment, just to kind of give you a picture of what I'm talking about when I think about assessment. So oftentimes in the world of education, we use the word assessment and test synonymously. And I'm trying very hard to change that within myself and within the community, the educational community. Because really a test is a type of assessment. Assessment is a much broader umbrella of activities, tasks, and assignments, things that we do in the classroom on a regular basis that give us evidence of where our students are at and where they need to go. So if I think about what I do in a classroom on a fairly regular basis, I present information to the students. I may do some direct instruction, or I might do a lecture. I might have them read something. And then I want to determine whether or not they have achieved that information or if they have learned that information. And when I do that, I do an assessment. So sometimes it might be a conference. So I might sit and have a conference with a child. It might be an observation. So they may be doing some worksheet and I'm walking around observing them, and maybe I'm giving them some feedback here and there. Maybe they are doing a project. Maybe I'm asking a question and I'm listening for their response so that I can judge what they may or may not know. All of that is assessment. And yes, every once in a while, I may give them a quiz because I really want to figure out what they know. And I may also give them a test. But a test and a quiz are actually, for me, a part of assessment. And I think the problem with the educational system right now is that we spend way more time worrying about tests and quizzes than we do about all the other evidence that we're collecting in our classrooms on a regular basis. And really, when you think about it, the assignments, the conferences, the games that the kids are playing, the questions that you're asking, the projects, the performances, the portfolios, the observations, the worksheets, that's where the majority of the information is. That's where we really get a really clear picture of what our students are able to do. And then sometimes, for some reason, we always think that after we've collected all of this rich information, and we have all this wonderful knowledge about where our students are at, we have to give them a quiz just to make sure, or give them a test just to make sure that they really know it. When in reality, we already know that they know it because we've seen all of this wonderful work that's come from them. So when we think about assessment, I want you to make it very broad, and I want you to think about it very purposefully, because in the world of a balanced assessment system, tests and quizzes are going to be very summative in nature, because I'm going to usually put a grade on them. And anytime I put a grade on something, I'm making that assessment very summative in nature. So grading tends to be about judging and evaluating, certifying the learning at a specific time. When we think about formative assessment, we want to think about forming, figuring out where the kids are at, where they need to go, and so giving them feedback rather than grades. So if I have an assignment, I have to determine where in the learning trajectory is this assignment? Where is this portfolio? Where is this worksheet? If I've just taught something brand new to the students, I probably don't want to put a grade on it too quickly because I really shouldn't expect them to know it yet. I really should allow them to have that time to practice. And instead of putting a grade on something that I have declared to be formative, I probably want to do more around feedback, because feedback is what helps grow children. We give feedback to feed forward is kind of the words of Susan Brookhart. So when we think about feedback, I wanted to give you a definition for that as well. So I'm going to give you just a minute to look at this definition of feedback. And if you would, in the chat box, just briefly, what are some key words in this definition that speak to you as you see, as you reflect on this definition? And just put them into the chat box real quick. So learning targets, right? Learning targets are key to feedback. It is very hard to give students really good feedback if you don't know what you're expecting them to know and be able to do. So we have to have clarity. So learning targets is key. Thank you for that. Thank you, Nanette. Strengths, how are they doing in terms of those targets? So what are their strengths and what are their need to grows, right? So what are you doing well? What do you need to take on next? Struggles and strengths. Yep, thank you, Michelle. Verbal and written, Karen, that's really important because a lot of people think that feedback has to be volumes of writing when in fact it doesn't. You can have a verbal conversation with the child. You can do it one-on-one. You can do it with the entire class and say, I noticed these patterns and trends when I was looking over your work from last night or from yesterday. Here's what we're going to do today based on it, right? So it doesn't necessarily always have to be written, and it doesn't necessarily always have to be one-on-one with your feedback. It can be to the whole group or to groups. Heather loves to give verbal feedback when you're walking around. Yep. And you can do the same thing online. If you're having private conversations with the kids, if you're pulling them into, rooms, there's a lot of ways. If you're doing seesaw, and you can kind of look to see, or if you're doing like the class kick, you can kind of see what the kids are doing. Flip grid, you can do that. I think they're all really important. And a plan for improving, right? So when we think about feedback, we think descriptive and actionable. This is what I'm seeing that's going well, and this is what you need to do next in order to improve yourself. When we think about feedback, we think about there are three different questions. There are three guiding questions that we think about when we give feedback. Where am I now? Where am I going? And how do I close the gap? So we either do that as a student, where am I now? As we're self-assessing, where do I need to go? How do I close the gap? We do that as a teacher by giving the kids that information. Where are you now? Where do you need to go? How do you close that gap? With peers and having peer conversation and answering it in the same way. This is where I think you're at. This is where I think you need to go. And I think that you might need to take. So these three guiding questions are really essential. And I put this GPS system because I really am a big GPS person. I think when I think of feedback and I think of formative assessment, I think of a GPS. Every time I go to visit a school, I know exactly where I'm starting in the morning, right? Because I'm in my car in my driveway. And I know exactly where I need to go because I have an address and I can put that in my GPS system. What I don't always know is the route from point A to point B, which is why it's really wonderful to have a GPS system or a teacher, a facilitator, somebody who's telling me if I'm on target, and if I get off target, what does a GPS system do? It reroutes me and gets me back on. But that GPS system cannot reroute me if it's not collecting evidence all along the way. And that's what we have to do, and we have to give feedback. So we can get feedback from a teacher, we can get feedback from ourselves, and we can get feedback from our peers. So there are three major types of ways that we can get feedback. In case you wanted to know, I am doing a workshop on feedback tomorrow afternoon between 4 and 6. And if you're interested, that is the registration for it. I think we have about 14 people signed up, but if any of you are interested in learning a little bit more about feedback and actually the power of feedback, feel free to join us there. And I'll put that back up towards the end. All right, I'm gonna give you these two definitions. And I want you to just take a minute and compare them. So one is the definition of self-assessment and one is the definition of peer assessment. And I want you to find what things they have in common and what might be some of the differences between the self and the peer assessment. And this isn't a trick question because they're very closely related. But I'll give you just a minute to look through those two definitions. You can see that both of these definitions are very centered around those three questions. Where am I at? Where am I going? And how do I close the gap? You'll notice, I hope, with the self-assessment that it really is the student self-thinking and doing that metacognitive thinking within their own brain. And then with peer, of course, it's about the dialogue that the kids are having together as they're actually looking at whatever the proficiency is, the rubric or whatever the case may be, and giving advice to one another in terms of what they've done well and where they need to go next. Elena, would you like to put something in the chat? Feel free, or if you want to just unmute and add anything to that conversation, I would be more than happy to hear what you have to say. Some similarities, some differences. Okay. There are some structures that need to be in place when we think about self and peer assessing. And so one of those structures is we have to really prepare students to engage. Students don't come to us just automatically knowing how to self and peer assess. And a lot of people will ask me, well, which comes first, the self-assessing or the peer assessing? I honestly believe that if we as teachers model the teacher feedback to the students really well, and we actually do a lot of think alouds in terms of how we're giving feedback to our students, It doesn't matter. I think they can go both ways. I think sometimes kids that are extroverts are going to prefer to do the peer assessing. Kids that are introverts, would probably prefer to do more of the self-assessing. Either way, we're looking at some of the same structures and we're looking at some of the same strategies that are involved, whether we're doing peer assessing or whether we're doing self-assessing. So we have to prepare students. We have to make sure that we have very clear learning targets, that we have success criteria that have been established, that maybe we have created those expectations and we have clarity in terms of what it is we expect students to do with that information. And we've created an opportunity and a culture within our classroom where dialoguing with one another or with ourselves, that metacognitive piece is celebrated. We have to give them resources such as rubrics, checklists, anchor papers, clearly defined tasks, exemplars. Exemplars are, examples of what quality work could look like. We have to model and explicitly teach the process, right? So we have to provide both descriptive and actionable feedback. We do that by thinking aloud. We want to facilitate opportunities for students to engage in the process and receive that feedback either from their peers or from themselves. So we have to give them that time to reflect. That's what feedback really is. It's a time of reflection and then taking that information and moving yourself forward, maybe setting a goal and moving yourself towards that goal. And we need to ensure that students have time to do that, right? We spend so much time making sure kids get the content, that we don't spend a lot of time letting them figure out, did they get the content? How did they get the content? Did they use the right strategy to get the content? So on and so forth. What might they do better next time? Either within themselves or with a partner or a group of teachers. So self and peer assessing, you've got a nice definition, and I'll share this PowerPoint with you later if you want it, just email me. You've got some good definitions, you've got some structures and strategies that you need to put in place to make sure that the students are engaging. And then we have to figure out what we're going to give feedback on. And there are 4 things that I think we usually give feedback on. And when you think about teaching strategies or learning strategies, they pretty much come in 4 different categories. And this is the work of Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, and John Hattie out of their book, Developing Assessment Capable Learners. And basically they say kids can receive or give themselves or from their peers feedback on their cognitive strategies. So cognitive strategies are the strategies that aid us in learning around content. So anything that we do to learn the math algorithms or how to read or how to do inquiry in science or learn the content of those subject areas, such as summarizing or estimating or making connections, those are cognitive strategies that help us learn the content. Then we have metacognitive strategies. And the metacognitive strategies are how we think about our thinking and how we use those cognitive strategies to move ourselves forward. So are we planning our next steps? Are we monitoring our progress? Are we regulating that learning progress? Are we using our time wisely? Are we evaluating our strategies and modifying those strategies when we find that the strategy doesn't work as well for us in one situation as it might in another? And are we really reflecting on that? So when we're asking the kids to self-assess, we're not only asking them to self-assess around the tasks and whether or not they were successful, but why they may have been successful or why they may not have been successful. Then we also want them to think about the motivational strategies. So these are the strategies that keep us motivated and engaged in learning. So things like our self-efficacy, our self-regulation, our engagement, our mindset. Are we really giving kids voice and choice? Are we keeping them engaged in the learning process? And if not, why not? And what can we do and what can they do to make sure that they're more motivated in order to learn? Even when they know that they may not ever use this stuff again, how can it help them get to the next level of learning, or how can it help them get to that next piece of knowledge that they might need? So all of that intrinsic motivation that we're always so desperately trying to bring out in our students. We need to give them feedback around that. And then the last one is the management strategies. And so these are the strategies that keep us on track. So finding and using our resources, evaluating those resources to determine whether or not they're the right resource, where to get them if the right resource if we've got the wrong resource, asking questions can be a management strategy for many of our students. How do we manage the information and make selections in terms of whether it's high quality or not? Managing our time and, of course, organization. We used to call all of those like study skills and life skills. Those are really important, and I don't think they're taught nearly as much as they used to be. So when we give feedback, we want to think about giving feedback and helping kids assess themselves and self-assess themselves, not only on the content, but on how they're thinking about the content, about the motivation behind their willingness to keep learning and to reflect, and how they're managing their life and their skills and their organization, because all of that is very important when it comes to the cognitive strategies. They all have an impact. So that was a very quick on two very complex processes in terms of thinking about self and peer assessing, and how to give yourself feedback and how to give your colleagues feedback. What we're going to do next is we're going to watch a couple of videos, and what I'm going to do, and then we're going to get into breakout rooms and have some conversation around what you saw in those videos and how you can connect it to your own practice. So these are a couple of questions that I would engage you in thinking about these videos. What are you seeing? Not only what are you seeing are the students doing, but how the teacher set it up. So what has the teacher done to set up these scenarios? What learning strategies do you hear the kids engaged in when they're giving themselves feedback? Are there cognitive, are there metacognitive, are there motivational strategies, are there management strategies? What are you learning in terms of watching these videos and making connections to your own practice? And in some cases, how might you do this virtually within your own context? So I'm going to show you two videos. The first one is very quick, and then the second one's about 2 minutes. 3 minutes maybe, and then we're going to get into some breakout rooms for about 5 minutes, and I'm going to have you debrief. Then we're going to come back and watch another video that's going to give you another scenario that you're going to go back into your breakout rooms and do some more conversation. And we're going to do that a couple of times until we run out of time. So this is the first one, and so I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to let you watch this video, and then we'll get you into some breakout rooms to dialogue. All right, so here you go.
Sarah, can you tell us how this chart works? We'll point to them and tell us about it.
I know nobody's on this, but some people might not be on this.
How come?
Because some people won't do that because we're in kindergarten, but some people might do that.
Good, now go further up the chart and tell us about the middle of it, Sarah, around the orange crayon.
Well, some people sound it out and try and make their letters neat on this one.
Good. And what about further up the chart, Sarah? Then what happens?
On this one, they try to sound it out. They try to make their letters neatly and try to make the thing right. This is where I am. I sound it out. I try to keep them nicely written. I try to make the right words. I try to keep the letters with a space before they start. And I'm going over to here because it's the last step and I'm over at the 9 step. This is the 10 step.
Okay, so that's Sarah, and she is self-assessing herself against a set of exemplars that are sort of like a rubric, and she knows exactly where she's at. Think about what the teacher has done in order for Sarah to be able to self-assess herself in that manner using that exemplar. And I'm going to show you this one, and then we'll break up into groups and have some dialogue around that.
The metacognitive strategies seen in the classroom, such as when the students are asked to finish a sentence that I'm starting, or even prompting them to finish a thought of mine that I may have started. These are strategies for them to not only be engaged, but are truly to get them thinking about their thinking. Now, before we get into find the theme of Finding Nemo, because I know that the theme is what the author wants me to learn, I want all of you to help me out in talking about it. Because part of how do you know is using your academic language. So, let's see here. I have a couple that I want to use today to help you answer this map. The first one that we're going to use, 3, 2, 1.
In my opinion.
Another one that I like to use is 3, 2, 1.
This makes me think that.
Now, if I tell you, hey, this makes me think that chocolate is awesome, what are you going to want to know? Why? How do you know? This is my favorite sentence that I'm going to use today a whole lot. 3, 2, 1.
I believe this because.
So it's really a way to spark that idea, to spark that conversation, and that cognitive flow for them to carry on their own in their groups. So the purpose ultimately is for them really not to need me there, but for them to just engage, understand the process in which I'm using the strategies so that they can go on and do it on their own.
One of my goals for my students is to have them be metacognitively aware of what they're doing at all times. So one of the strategies that I utilize is the use of rubrics. Rubrics are really helpful in getting students to articulate where they are in the learning process because they can see what steps they need to take in order to move their learning along. And so how do you know that your explanation is a success?
We know our explanation is a success when it matches up with our detail.
Okay. And are you going to use anything? Are you going to use anything to help you measure that success?
We're going to use our eraser bookmark and our rubrics.
Oh, okay. You're going to use your rubric. Good. And what are you going to use? How are you going to use that?
We're going to use it based on these questions. We're going to use it to figure out what this is on here. Is there a novice, apprentice, practitioner, or expert?
Okay. And so what's your goal?
My goal is to get at least 2 to 3 good pieces of evidence and a good piece of writing.
What's your goal?
My goal is to finish the racer strategy.
Okay.
Finish the racer strategy and make it to the point where people can understand. Understand what? What I was writing about.
Okay. Everything or just your evidence? Everything. Okay.
All right, I'm going to stop it there. So far, we've seen exemplars and using exemplars for the students to self-assess against, sentence starters to think about metacognitively, how to help kids reflect and actually come up with some of those metacognitive and cognitive explanations, and rubrics and how they might use rubrics to help self-assess and determine where they're at in their writing and their finding of evidence. So thinking about those 3 strategies, exemplars, sentence starters, and rubrics, we're going to put you into groups. Going to give you about 5 minutes, maybe with a minute warning, so maybe 6 total, and let you have some exploration in terms of what you're seeing there and how this might apply in your own classrooms and how you might use these even in a virtual context. So we will see you in about 5 minutes. Michelle, is there anything that they need to know before we go off?
Nope, you should be whisked away in just a moment.
Okay, thank you.